Bringing a new baby into the world is a joyous event for any family. Normally, the mother and father will already have a solid bond in place with their baby before he or she is even born. The many months of going to doctor visits, seeing ultrasound pictures, hearing the heartbeat, feeling the baby move around, not to mention the anticipation of his or her arrival, all of these things help to strengthen that parental bond. Then after those 9 months of waiting, the parents are rewarded with a sweet bundle of joy that everybody's excited to meet. There are celebrations, there's gift giving, the family will often spend more time together when a new baby is introduced. This should be a happy time for everybody, especially for the mother and father. But what if a new baby's arrival isn't expected, or worse yet, isn't wanted? What if both parents feel nothing towards their infant? Perhaps the baby has interrupted the parents' normal way of life, and maybe one or both parents feel a sense of resentment for having to take care of it. That's the kind of case that I'm going to discuss today. The details of this case are terrible, so listener discretion is definitely advised. This case comes out of Alta Vista, Iowa. On August 30th, 2017, Zach Koehn calls 911 to report that his infant son has been found dead. Here's a very short clip of that 911 call.
South County 911.
This is Zach Coehn. Need an ambulance sent out here to my apartment.
Okay, what's going on?
Around 9, my girlfriend went to feed our son, and then about 11 or 11:30, she went to check on him, and he was gone.
Gone meaning?
He died.
Okay.
He's at probably 4 months. I don't know if it's sudden death syndrome or what.
Your son is 4 months old, and the last time that you was checked on was 9?
No, it was she fed him at 9.
Okay.
And she hadn't heard him, she went to check on him, hadn't heard him cry or whatever, and so probably about 11:30, 11:40, she went to check on him. He passed away.
Listening to that 911 call, you can clearly hear the panic and concern in the father's voice. Wait, you didn't hear it either? Of course you didn't. That's because there was none. He reports the death of his child with as much emotion as one would have when ordering a pizza. He sounds completely detached. Before I go any further, I want to quickly touch on the birth of this baby. I feel like it's important to understand some things for context before I get into more details of the case. This baby was only a few days shy of being 4 months old. He was born on May 1st, 2017. Parents Cheyanne Harris, age 20, and Zachary Koehn, age 28, are at a friend's house party. Cheyanne claims that she had been constipated and had been trying to relieve herself off and on throughout the day. And while at this party, she starts to experience pretty severe stomach cramps. So she goes to the bathroom. She sits on the toilet, and to her shock and amazement, she starts to give birth. She said she looked down and she could see his little head and his tiny eyes staring right back up at her. Zach helps her off the toilet and into the bathtub. He runs some water, and the baby is fully born soon after, and it's a little boy. According to both parents, neither of them were aware that Cheyanne was pregnant. An ambulance is summoned, and they take parents and baby to the hospital. The baby is evaluated, and even though the doctor thought that the baby was born 1 to 2 weeks premature, he was of a good weight and he appeared healthy overall. They named the little boy Sterling. The only problem is that little Sterling tests positive for methamphetamines in his system. It's important to note that both Cheyanne and Zach were heavy drug users. Their drugs of choice were methamphetamines and marijuana. The two of them were in a cycle for doing drugs for long periods of time, then trying to get clean. I'm not sure how many attempts or how serious these attempts were for them to get clean, but they always returned to using. It wouldn't be a giant leap to assume that Cheyanne had done drugs for the majority, if not all, of her pregnancy. For reasons unknown, the baby is not taken from the parents for testing positive for drugs. They are allowed to bring him home with them. Okay, so now I'm going to go forward to the day of Sterling's death when the 911 call was made, which is August 30th. So once the 911 call is made, an emergency medical technician named Tony Frederick is at home when she gets a call about an infant in distress. She's given the address and rushes over to the apartments where the baby is located. She sees both parents, Zach and Cheyanne, standing outside of the apartment with their 2-year-old daughter, Nala. Tony Tony asks, "Where is the baby?" Zach replies, "Inside." Tony has a sense of urgency about her, thinking there may still be a chance to save this baby. Tony says, "Show me." So Zach walks her inside their small apartment to a back bedroom where Sterling's at. As Tony walks in, she sees the room is completely dark. There are no lights on. She also can feel how unbearably hot it is in this room, and she can smell an overwhelming stench of urine. She has to prompt Zach to turn on a light, telling him she needs to be able to see. So he switches on the ceiling light. She sees that the windows in the room are fully covered by blankets. These blankets are blocking out any sunlight, and even though one of the windows is open, the blanket is blocking any airflow that could possibly come in. She looks around but sees no baby crib. Tony has to ask again, "Where is he?" And Zach responds, "He's in the swing," and he walks out of the room, leaving Tony in there on her own. The baby swing is facing the wall in the corner of the room, so that's why she didn't initially see the baby. So she hurries over to the swing, but the sight she's confronted with is truly disturbing. Baby Sterling sits motionless in this filthy wet swing. The cloth swing liner is soaked in urine and is stained a nasty brown color. Sterling is unusually thin for a baby his age, and there is dried blood around his mouth and his nose. His little eyes stare vacantly towards the wall, with no life behind them. Sterling's fists are clenched tightly near his face, frozen in place. Tony checks for a pulse, but his skin is cold to the touch, and his limbs are stiff. It's more than evident that he is beyond saving. She touches his chest and can feel that his clothing is crusty. A filthy wet blanket is tucked around him in this swing, and when Tony attempts to move it, she sees several little flies fly out of it and off of it. Once she has the blanket completely removed, she sees something that turns her stomach. Sterling's diaper is full of not only urine and feces, but also hundreds of maggots. Though they are mainly inside of his diaper, there are some that are crawling on his clothing and other parts of his body. This was not sudden infant death syndrome as Zach had stated in his 911 call. This was something far worse. This was criminal. Tony contacts a second medical examiner, which is protocol, and then she notifies the sheriff to come to the apartment. Both Zach and Cheyanne are questioned by police detectives. The couple initially claimed that Cheyanne fed Sterling around 9 or 9:30 that morning, but when pressured for the truth, Cheyanne had a hard time even remembering when the last time she fed him. When asked how many feedings Sterling would receive in a day, Cheyanne replied, "Normally it would be 3 or 4 of those 8-ounce things." That's a very odd answer. Babies that age usually eat every couple of hours. When asked how would she know when Sterling needed to be fed, and she replied, "Well, he usually cries. That's all he can do." In an attempt to figure out what his appetite was like over the previous 2 days, the detective asked her, was he taking regular feedings? Cheyanne said, "As far as I could tell, yeah." Again, this is a very odd response. Cheyanne couldn't even tell the detective when the last time Zach had any interaction with his son. This is a very concerning statement considering this is a very small apartment. Both Zach and Cheyanne would only be a few feet away from where Sterling was at any given time. She would tell the detectives that just the day before she had changed Sterling's diaper and fed him. She put him in the swing and he went to sleep. She told the detective that she couldn't recall what time that was though. It wasn't until later the next morning, the day that Sterling died, that the thought occurred to her that she should check on him. This was after changing her daughter's diaper and feeding her cookies for breakfast. The time was somewhere between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. That is way too much time to leave a baby alone, and especially not to be feeding him. Cheyanne would ultimately confess that she had not attended to Sterling in any way for an entire 19 hours before she found him deceased. Most of the interview, she came across as unemotional. She did shed a few tears and stated that she should have checked on him more, but she didn't think anything was wrong because she had not heard him cry. Nothing true would come out of Cheyanne's mouth that day. Astonishingly, Zach and Cheyanne were not arrested immediately. That would not happen until close to 2 months later. Police had to build their case against them, not leaving any stone unturned before making the arrest. They needed to gather background info on both of the parents, they needed to question family, friends, as well as neighbors, and they also had to wait for Sterling's autopsy to be completed. Finally, on October 25th, 2017, they were both charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment resulting in death. At trial, Sheriff Deputy Jason Russell testified that as he kneeled down to the baby's level, he could smell several really bad odors. Aside from urine, feces, and actual human decomposition, he could smell air freshener. Cheyanne had actually placed 2 air fresheners under the the swing because the stench coming from the baby was gag reflex worthy. In that room, he could see fresh diapers stacked together, but no dirty diapers from Sterling could be found anywhere in the entire apartment. A bottle was sitting on the floor in front of the swing, but the formula inside of it was very old and curdled. The temperature in the room was 81 degrees, but it felt much hotter than that. Sterling's official causes of death were malnutrition, dehydration, and severe diaper rash. The diaper rash was so bad that it heavily damaged his skin, so much so that it allowed E. coli to enter his body because the feces had been caked on it for so long. The soft spot on his head, called the fontanelle, was sunken in due to lack of fluids. Neither Zach or Cheyanne had cared for or fed Sterling in what the medical examiner testified as anywhere between 10 and 14 days. The heavily soiled diaper Sterling had on had not been changed in about 9 to 13 days. How did the medical examiner know this? The flies that were found on him and in his room take about that long to complete their life cycle. The feces in his diaper had been there so long that it had actually begun to decompose. The maggots that were in his diaper and on his body were at different stages of development. There were no maggots present in Sterling's eyes or his mouth, which meant that they had arrived while Sterling was still alive. The flies had been drawn in by the odor of urine and feces, as well as his severely infected skin. From the time that Sterling was born to the time that he died, he only gained 5.5 ounces total. A baby his age should have weighed close to 11 pounds. He weighed less than 7. Jennifer, a neighbor and occasional babysitter, ran into Zach and Cheyanne with their dog at a park just a few days after Sterling's death. She was taken aback because they seemed pretty happy and they were having a good time. Cheyanne complained that law enforcement was out to get them and they should have just taken their daughter and fled. Jennifer stated that when the couple first moved to the apartment complex, she was concerned about how small and delicate Sterling was. His skin was always raw with diaper rash, but he appeared clean and happy otherwise. On the day of Sterling's death, this neighbor would be the one who would have to tell Zach to call 911. He hadn't even thought to do that himself. When she walked out of her apartment, she saw Zach pacing outside, smoking a cigarette and saying, "My baby boy is gone." Cheyanne's mother stated that even though Sterling was small for his age, she thought that he was developing normally. She would sometimes watch him and Nala, but she never went inside the apartment because she and Zach did not get along. The children would always be brought out to her. It should be noted that she had not seen Sterling for close to 3 weeks before he died. Zach was a truck driver with a variable schedule, and he would sometimes be away for several days at a time. His own brother testified that Zach told him that Sterling had not been cleaned or changed for an entire week, just a few weeks prior, while he was away working. Zach even told his brother that Cheyanne was not taking very good care of Sterling, and even asked him if he would take custody of the baby if things did not work out with Cheyanne. Zach testified that 2 days before Sterling died, on August 28th, he went inside the room and sort of interacted with him. He said that Sterling reached out for him and he touched his hand in return. He said that Sterling was covered by a blanket, so he couldn't see the terrible state that he was in. Not once did he try to take Sterling out of that swing. He believed that the smell in the room was coming from a bag of dirty diapers, so he took this bag of trash out thinking that that would solve the problem. That was the last time that he would see Sterling alive. He left later on to go on a trucking assignment. 2 days later, the day that Sterling was found dead, Zach said that he arrived home close to 6 o'clock in the morning and he went straight to sleep without checking on him. Being away does not absolve him from responsibility in Sterling's death. Zach was home well enough to know that Sterling was being relentlessly and cruelly neglected. In fact, Zach had very little to do with his son the entire time that he was alive. Zach did not believe that Sterling was his child because Cheyanne had slept around. A friend named Jordan testified that he would often come to the apartment to do meth with Zach and Cheyanne, and he had no idea that they even had a son. He never once saw the baby anytime he was in the apartment. He knew about their daughter, but nothing was ever mentioned about Sterling. A psychologist who had a few sessions with Cheyanne stated that she was suffering from postpartum depression and heavy substance abuse. She had gone through postpartum depression when her daughter was born, and she was prescribed medication to take for it, but she stopped taking it after a short while because she said that she didn't like the way it made her feel. The psychologist would go on to say that when Sterling was born, that she was most likely experiencing another bout of this same depression. Cheyanne Cheyanne divulged some very disturbing information to this psychologist. She told him that she did not want to change Sterling's diapers because he had constant diarrhea. She said her daughter Nala would become upset if she paid too much attention to Sterling. She admitted that she didn't want anything to do with him. Depression or not, she continued to take care of herself and her daughter daily, but she ignored little Sterling, who was locked away in that hot, smelly, dark back bedroom. She had neglected him all of his life, and for an entire 10 to 14 days before he died, Cheyanne would completely pretend that Sterling did not exist. Out of sight, out of mind. She completely ignored his screaming and crying. She was just in the next room, so she would have no doubt heard him loud and clear. As she enjoyed watching TV, Sterling suffered. While she posted on Facebook, Sterling suffered. She made sure that she had adequate amounts of food and drink, but baby Sterling had nothing. After several days of crying, he would have eventually exhausted himself, becoming so weak that he couldn't cry anymore. But even after he was silenced by weakness, she continued to ignore him. Cheyanne would go into the room that she kept Sterling in periodically to sop up some of the urine and feces that had oozed out of his diaper. In an attempt to cut back on the smell, she would pack clothing around him in the seat of the swing for this purpose. She was well aware of Sterling's declining and appalling condition. She witnessed it every time she went into that room, and she did nothing to intervene or save him. Even once he finally succumbed to this extreme neglect, neither Zach or Cheyanne couldn't even be bothered to remove him from that nasty swing. They didn't even try to clean him up before people got to the house. They felt no sense of shame leaving him in the condition that he was in. Cheyanne resented Sterling. She blamed him for causing problems between her and Zach. Zach didn't want anything to do with this baby. The fact that Zach didn't believe that Sterling was his child caused major issues between the two. Zach's defense at trial was to blame everything on Cheyanne. He said that he worked a lot and that Cheyanne was the one who was mainly responsible for his care. Zach would say that he placed his trust in the wrong person to take care of Sterling. He said that he was unaware of Sterling's horrendous condition and that he would have fed and changed him had he known. His attorney quoted, "This was a tragedy, not a crime. There isn't an ounce of truth in any of these statements." He knew Cheyanne was not doing her job as a mother, and he didn't do anything that a father should have done. At trial, the prosecutor even got Zach to admit that he took better care of his dog than he did Sterling. He knew that Sterling was being severely neglected, and like Cheyanne, he did nothing to help him. Just like Cheyanne, he ignored little Sterling's cries. He attempted to say that he sold his own drugs to get money to buy Sterling things that he needed just a few days before he died. Let's be clear though, they had everything that they needed in that apartment to take care of Sterling. They had both formula and baby diapers, so it wasn't a matter of not having things to take care of him. It was completely that they didn't want to take care of him. Neither one of them. Zach was one of the worst people to put on the stand at trial. He did himself no favors by testifying. He said nothing to redeem himself and in fact made himself look really bad to the jury. He was home plenty enough to know that Sterling was in serious trouble. Thankfully, the jury saw right through his lies, convicting him of murder and child endangerment, and they sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Cheyanne's defense at trial also tried pulling the wool over the jury's eyes. This wasn't a case of murder, her attorney said. Postpartum depression and drug abuse are what killed Sterling, not Cheyanne. She did not want him to die. Her attorneys tried to say that since Cheyanne didn't physically abuse Sterling, that it proved that she had no ill intent towards him. They argued that there was no evidence of malice on her part, so there could be no murder. I beg to disagree, and thankfully the jury did too. Like Zach, she was also found guilty of first-degree murder and child endangerment, and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The statement that there's no evidence of malice does not apply to this case. It requires conscious effort to do what Cheyanne and Zach did to Sterling. How many days did Sterling suffer in that nasty room all alone? No one around to comfort him, to feed him, to change him, nothing. He suffered like that for 10 to 14 days. Can you imagine this young baby being alone with no one to tend to him for that long? He was helpless to care for himself. They allowed their son to suffer a slow and horrific death because they wanted nothing to do with him. He was kept in that nasty swing in the corner of that dreadful dark room like a dirty secret. They kept the door shut most of the time to muffle his screams. They allowed him to wither away, to suffer suffer, and yet lawyers try to say that there was no malice. Even if they didn't want the baby, and even if the baby wasn't Zach's, where is their sense of compassion for another living being? Where's their humanity? How could they watch their own son deteriorate and waste away? They did do a DNA test, and it was proven that Zach was the father. All of this is just something that I can never understand. Maggots were eating away at his skin from one of the most severest cases of diaper rash, and he was alive to feel it all. They treated him as though he was trash. He endured a lonely and painful death. I'm very glad that both Zach and Cheyanne got life in prison without parole. There was a prison documentary filmed at the prison that Cheyanne is at, and she participated in being interviewed. She admitted on camera that she didn't remember how many days she left Sterling alone in that room, but she knows it was several days before she went to check on him. Cheyanne is in complete denial. She blamed her drug abuse for what happened to Sterling. She said, "If I wasn't on the drugs, then none of this would have happened." She continued saying she wasn't a good person when she was on the drugs. I don't buy that at all. She took care of her daughter. She took care of herself while she was doing the drugs, so why couldn't she take care of Sterling? It went much deeper than that. She did not care about this little boy at all, and she took her anger and her frustrations from fighting with Zach out on Sterling by neglecting him to death. These are two people who definitely deserve to be where they're at. And that is the end of this case. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the case discussion. If you liked my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. I definitely could use some more subscribers. If there's a case that you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comment section. I love to take requests. I also would love to know what you thought about this case. Thanks again for watching, and remember, stay safe out there, people.